$590 billion, 183,000 workers, 3,400 tons of pure gold. This is the most expensive structure in human history, yet throughout 7 years of construction, not a single hammer was heard on site. Why did King Solomon gamble his kingdom's entire prosperity for absolute silence? Modern engineers are still baffled by this architectural miracle, but that silence masks a darker reality, a temple built for the God of deliverance, forged by the chains of 100,000 slaves. What is the true cost of building a home for the divine? To understand the silence of the temple, you must first understand the blood on the hands that dreamed it. King David was a warrior. For 40 years, he carved out an empire with the edge of a sword. He conquered Jerusalem, united the tribes, and turned Israel into a superpower. But David had a dream that his sword could never fulfill. He wanted to build God a permanent house. The response was a crushing no. 2 Samuel 7 records the moment. God told him, "You are not the one to build me a house. You have shed much blood." A house of peace could not be built by a man of war. That task belonged to his son, Solomon, a name derived from shalom, meaning peace. Solomon was born to consolidate, not to conquer, to build, not to fight. But here is the detail most people overlook. David didn't just give up. Instead, he entered a state of quiet, frantic obsession. Picture David in his final years. He is no longer on a throne or a battlefield. He is in the treasury. The hands that once killed Goliath now grip a counting stylus. The eyes that once scanned enemy lines now trace columns of inventory scrolls. Talent by talent, shekel by shekel, every ounce is accounted for. This is what psychologists might call a legacy complex. David knew his reign was built on conquest, things that fade and rot. He was a man trying to outrun his own history. He spent decades accumulating war spoils, conquered tributes, and international trade wealth, all for a project he knew he would never see finished. He wasn't just collecting raw materials, he was trying to wash the blood from his name by building something eternal. He wanted to be redeemed through a legacy he would never touch. 1 Chronicles 22 reveals the scale of this obsession. From the national treasury, David set aside 100,000 talents of gold and 1,000,000 talents of silver. From his personal fortune, he added another 3,000 talents of Ophir gold, the purest in the ancient world. When David died, he didn't just leave Solomon a kingdom. He left him $590 billion and a mission to turn a father's violent past into a son's silent future. But as Solomon would soon learn, gold is the easy part. Building the impossible in total silence, that would require a deal with a merchant king and the labor of 180,000 men. $590 billion. It's a number that defies imagination. To put that in perspective, humanity's most ambitious modern project, the International Space Station, cost about $150 billion. Solomon's temple had nearly 4 times that budget in raw materials alone, before a single worker was ever paid. This wasn't just a construction project, it was an economic supernova. But gold alone doesn't build a monument. You need expertise. You need the steel of the ancient world, cedar of Lebanon, massive, rot-resistant, and soaring over 100 feet tall. To get it, Solomon struck a cold, hard business deal with King Hiram of Tyre, the maritime superpower of the Mediterranean. Feel the salt spray at the Joppa harbor as those massive rafts of timber drift in from the north. Now turn inland and look at the hills shimmering in the heat. Jerusalem sits 800 meters above you. Imagine dragging those multi-ton logs up 60 kilometers of rocky, climbing terrain. No engines, no hydraulics, just rope, sledges, and raw human muscle. To move this mountain of material, Solomon mobilized 183,000 people. In modern American terms, that would be like drafting over 30 million people. nearly 10% of the entire U.S. population, for one single structure. But here is the part Sunday school often skips. This workforce was divided by a jagged line of inequality. At the top were 30,000 Israelites. They worked in shifts, 1 month in the mountains, 2 months home with their families. It was sustainable. It was even humane. But beneath them, the 150,000 stonecutters and carriers. These were not Israelites. They were the others, foreigners, the descendants of the conquered Canaanites. For them, there was no rotation. There was no going home. They were bound by the mass forced service to the state. Think about the irony. The God of Israel had famously liberated his people from Egyptian slavery. Now, in the heart of Jerusalem, his house was being built substantially by slave labor. The house of peace was resting on the backs of the broken. Every gold-plated wall, every shimmering floor, stood as a testament to a glory that 150,000 men would never be allowed to enjoy. As the stones began to rise in total silence, a storm of resentment was already brewing beneath the surface. The temple's foundations weren't just made of rock. They were soaked in the sweat of the oppressed, planting the very seeds that would one day tear the kingdom apart. If you had visited Jerusalem during those 7 years of construction, you would have witnessed something eerie. 183,000 workers swarming a massive site, yet the air was heavy with an unnatural silence. No hammers ringing, no chisels cracking, no shouting supervisors. 1 Kings 6:7 records this strange restriction. No hammer, chisel, or any other iron tool was heard at the temple site while it was being built. Why this bizarre rule? It was theological. In the ancient Israelite mind, iron was the language of weapons. Weapons were for war, and the house of peace could not be touched by the tools of death. To Solomon, silence wasn't just a preference, it was worship. Every wall, every floor, every threshold was treated as sacred space from the moment it was conceived. But how do you build humanity's most expensive structure without a single on-site adjustment? The answer is a feat of engineering that still baffles modern architects: prefabrication. Every single block was dressed at the quarry miles away. They were shaped, smoothed, and finished to exact specifications. When they arrived at the Temple Mount, they simply slid into position. No trimming, no modifications. Like ancient Lego blocks, each piece had a designated home, and they fit perfectly. The precision required is staggering. Without computers, without laser levels, every quarry team had to work from identical blueprints with millimeter tolerances. One mistake, one block cut too large, and the entire section would be compromised. But where did these stones come from? Descend into the darkness beneath Jerusalem itself, into Zedekiah's quarries. 5 acres of caverns extending 200 meters into the bedrock. This is where they found the Melekeh, the royal stone. It has a remarkable property. It is soft and easy to cut while underground, but hardens into marble-like durability the moment it is exposed to the air. It was the perfect material for a silent masterpiece. Run your hand along those underground walls today. You can still feel the ancient chisel marks. But here is the shadow of that greatness, what we call the ethics of beauty. To keep the Temple Mount quiet and holy, the noise and the agony were pushed into the dark. Down in those tunnels, 80,000 men spent years cutting stone by torchlight, stones they would never see placed in the building above. While the elite walked the silent, gold-plated floors above, the earth beneath them roared with the sound of chisels and the groans of the exhausted. It reflects a haunting truth about our own world. We crave the clean and the perfect, our sleek technology, our luxury towers, but we often choose to ignore the silent factories where the noise and the exploitation are hidden from our view. Solomon's temple was a house of peace, but that peace was bought with a hidden roar. We have to ask, is a building truly holy if its silence is purchased by the suffering of those in the dark? After 7 years of silent labor, the moment of truth finally arrived. Imagine the scene. All of Israel is gathered, and the air is thick with anticipation. The priests carry the Ark of the Covenant, the nation's most sacred object, through the massive gold-plated doors, past walls drenched in precious metal, and into the Holy of Holies, a perfect cube of solid gold. They set the Ark down, they withdraw, and then it happens. The ancient records describe a cloud so thick, so heavy, that the priests could not even stand to perform their duties. This was the Shekinah, the visible, tangible glory of God filling the house. In this single moment, every drop of sweat from 183,000 workers was redeemed. Every talent of gold was justified. The silence of construction gave way to the thunder of presence. For a fleeting moment, the finite had captured the infinite. But the glory didn't last. Fast forward to 586 BC, the gold that once blinded onlookers from a mile away now reflects the orange glow of a city in flames. The Babylonian army didn't just defeat Israel, they systematically erased its heart. They stripped the gold, smashed the bronze, and burned the cedar beams to ash. This brings us to a question many of you have asked. If this was the most expensive building in history, why is there nothing left? Why can't we find a single pillar or a gilded brick today? The answer is as cold as it is logical. Jerusalem is an archaeological onion, a city with dozens of layers of history literally stacked on top of each other. The first temple sits at the very bottom, directly beneath the Temple Mount, the most politically and religiously sensitive ground on the planet. Excavation there is essentially impossible. But there's a more visceral reason. The Babylonians performed what we call a thorough asset liquidation. They didn't just destroy, they recycled. Gold was melted, bronze was pounded down, and those massive stones? Ironically, the very technique that allowed the temple to be built in silence prefabrication, without mortar, made it incredibly easy to dismantle. Like a Lego set, the stones were unstacked and hauled away to build the palaces and walls of the next empire. The silence of the archaeological record isn't proof that the temple never existed. It is proof of the efficiency of the conquerors and the humility of time. Sometimes the most magnificent things don't leave a footprint on the ground. They leave a shadow across history. $590 billion in gold and silver. Where does that much wealth go? When the smoke of the Babylonian invasion finally cleared in 586 BC, the greatest fortune in human history didn't just vanish, it transformed. It was the beginning of an intercontinental treasure hunt that spanned centuries. Most of the temple's treasure was hauled back to the vaults of Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. When the Persians conquered Babylon, the gold moved again into the hands of Cyrus the Great. From there, history suggests it was melted down, refined, and stamped into the very coins that paid Roman legions and adorned the palaces of Greek nobles. There is a haunting irony in the thought that the same molecules of gold, once dedicated to the Holy of Holies, were later spent on the vanities of pagan empires and the wages of war. But was this wealth actually a blessing, or was it a curse? Solomon inherited a fortune, but he died leaving a legacy of debt. To fund his obsession with the magnificent, he pushed his kingdom to the brink of bankruptcy. He was forced to trade away 20 cities to King Hiram just to settle the bill for the cedar and the craftsmen. But the true cost wasn't just financial. The forced labor and the heavy taxes created a resentment that sizzled beneath the surface for 40 years. Within one generation of Solomon's death, the kingdom of Israel, once the most powerful empire in the region, split in two. The north rebelled, and the golden age was over. Solomon had built a monument so rich it became a bullseye for every conqueror on the planet. He invited the world to look at Jerusalem, but in doing so, he invited their greed. If Solomon had built with humble wood and a sincere heart, would his legacy have lasted longer? Wealth brought the presence of God into a visible, golden reality, but it also anchored that reality to a world of rust and looters. The gold was eventually scattered to the four corners of the earth, serving as a silent, glittering reminder. Anything we build based solely on material value is destined to be torn apart. What Solomon built in 7 years became the very reason his kingdom fell. We have to ask, was the gold worth the price of the nation? Stop for a second. Do you see it now? The breathless silence of the construction site, the millimeter precision of stones cut in the dark. None of that was just about engineering. It was a hidden message. People often ask, why would God allow such a magnificent house to be burned to the ground? The answer lies in a shift far more monumental than gold or silver. The ancient records describe a turning point. The Creator no longer wanted to dwell in houses of stone built by human hands. Solomon's temple, in all its blinding glory, was just a blueprint for a much more perfect structure. That structure is you. If it took Solomon 7 years to build a temple of stone, your life is a construction project that spans decades. Think about it. Every lesson you learn, every heartbreak you endure, and every time you choose kindness when the world is loud, that is when a spiritual stone is being dressed and polished in the silence of your own soul. You are the moving temple. The same presence that made ancient priests fall to their faces in awe now seeks to reside in your very breath. We spend so much of our lives searching for the lost gold of the past, chasing ruins and artifacts, that we forget the most magnificent reality is currently beating inside our own chests. Solomon built a house for the world to look at, but you are being built as a place for the divine to look out from. It is the ultimate third temple, not one made of brick and mortar, but one made of spirit and truth. The gold of the first temple was eventually stolen. The cedar was burned. The stones were hauled away to build pagan cities. But the temple made of character cannot be looted. It cannot be bankrupted. It is a legacy that transcends the physical. So, as we close this untold story of Solomon's temple, I have to ask you, what are you building that will outlast you? Is it a monument of material wealth that time will eventually erase? Or are you dressing the stones of a legacy that no fire can touch? Solomon built for 7 years. How are you spending yours? If you could ask King Solomon one question about this project, what would it be? Drop it in the comments below. Is achievement worth the cost of humanity? Tell us your thoughts below. Next, the mystery of the lost Ark.